Bloody hell, man. We're at the end of another year, and I thought I'd front load this one. If you want to get to the actual coverage of the games and that, here's the time for that. But I thought I'd do my little, oh, isn't this a funny old year thing, like right at the start, just to make sure that, it's done, It has been a different one for me, personally. I think I've talked in the other end of the year video that came out in February, which was meant to come out last December, but it didn't because of the fact that my computer was pretty zonked at that point. But yeah, no, my career has changed. I am no longer a teaching assistant. I am now a full-blown teacher, and that has eaten up a lot of my time. You'll notice that the number of games on this list is comparably quite small compared to the other years that I've done this video, and that's because my free time has finally, after years of saying it probably will, has finally diminished. I get in from work knackered. On Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays I go to the gym. On the weekend I spend time with my partner. On Thursday I make the time to see friends. On Tuesday I go to my Smash Brothers weekly. So like my one day to play games pretty much is Monday, and I play some stuff on Sunday too. Obviously I do play little bits, but there's no like big long sessions of me playing stuff anymore because of when I get in the house. And you know what, that's okay. It had to happen eventually, and it's been a turbulent year this year. Like, I don't want to get too deep into it, but it's a hard job. Teaching is a very hard job, and that, so yeah, list's a lot shorter, but I think the games that I did play, I wanted to really take my time with. I was, again, last year I told you, I think I was sort of over the idea of rushing through as many as I could to get to this video, so yeah, without further ado, this is 2023's year in review. Gaming never truly stops. And yeah, so enjoy. It catches in a bit, and if I don't say it again, have a lovely new year. Catch you soon. It's starting to feel like a tradition now that each of these end of year videos is going to start with a Pokemon game. I mean, if you completely ignore 2021's video, that is. And this time around, we once again jump into a brand new generation of Pocket Monsters with Pokemon Violet, which, over the course of its reveal cycle, I actually found myself outright liking the look of compared to every other console game the series has put out over the past 4 years. I'll credit this mostly to the game actually having some neat new features, and also the fact that Legends Arceus did wonders for my outlook on the series, showing that it could still be fun, new and fresh. Violet looked like it took quite a bit from Legends Arceus, and that was enough to make me at least somewhat optimistic for it, and after playing it, I'm glad to say that this optimism was well placed, as I ended up enjoying it the most of any mainline Pokemon game since Gen 6. Like, let's get this straight out of the way though. The game, from a technical standpoint, is horrid. I'm not one to notice stuff like frame rates and pop-in usually, but this game flies right into your face and makes you notice it's chugging and teleporting things in randomly. Couple this with sometimes you just not being able to simply move or like getting stuck while jumping about, and you'll be seeing most of the reason some absolutely slammed this game at release. Looking past the technical aspects though, I think the game did a really great job at feeling fresh, doing away with traditional routes nearly entirely to give the player an expanded version of Sword and Shield's wild area for the entire game, setting out objectives over a large map and saying, off you go. I mean, after an hour or so of tutorials, that is. The freedom to tackle the objectives in any order you see fit is a great change to the railroading seen within the series for years now, and the fact that there's an equal chance you'll simply wander into a cave or area and encounter a Pokemon so vastly beyond your level, but there's still a chance that you can catch it, just makes for some excellent oh shit moments where you have to get away dodging pursuing Pokemon, or again actually manage to tough it out and either beat or capture the thing that's attacking you. I did this a couple of times, and while I think I found certain routes and went through them backwards inadvertently, especially once you get the climbing ability at the end of the game, it didn't really matter because of the experiences the game gave me, I would like to say. This really endeared me to my team too, like, beyond just liking their designs and the idea of them, feeling like we were going on an actual journey together made me enjoy them even more. Here's my team, by the way. This gen has some insane designs. Like, look, it's a pepper that's firing grass. People are saying Scoville should have had a third Evo. No, look at him. He's weird, and that's him. Look, it's a fairy who's had enough and murders other Pokemon for sport. It's Clodsire. One of the most defining moments of my playthrough was defo taking on what's meant to be the final challenge, the fighting base, vastly underleveled, and somehow, thanks to Big Man's Iron Defense and Stone Edge, managing to get through without losing my entire run. The way you're probably going to get around to the game's objectives is on the Ride Pokemon, who's also the box legendary, and this combined with fast travel meant I never felt like I was just meandering around the region. I actually also got quite attached to Miraidon because of how much time you spend with the thing, and seeing him get stronger as you complete objectives was really neat, as it allowed me to have more options on how to explore the region, though again, once you get Glide and Climb, you basically never have to walk a route again and the game is pretty much over. This lovely lizard wasn't the only character I enjoyed though, because they actually gave us a supporting cast I could get behind. Like, I actually wanted to complete each of the objectives to see how each of their routes progressed. I also really enjoyed the Ice-type gym leader's character. Like, he's just this begrudging little dude who doesn't really want to be a gym leader, wanted to be something else, but because his real passion he's now incapable of following, he's just like completely apathetic to the idea of battling and being a gym leader. I don't know, I just liked them. Everything in the story sort of chugs along how you'd expect, with no real twists and turns that you won't see coming, then bam, like the last 2 hours of the game happen and everything changes. Before this point, I liked the individual stories, but then they're suddenly like, by the way, here's every bit of intrigue you could ever want, and I don't want to say a word on it because it's just so weird and so cool. It's weird to say a Pokemon game has like a cool twist in its story, but no, it really caught me off guard in the best way. So yeah, this game's got a lot going for it, certainly more than Generations 8 and 7 did, and if they expand upon this formula further for the 10th generation, we're actually, I think, gonna be in for a really, really great time. It's nice to see Pokemon doing something interesting again. You know what else is interesting? Usually in January for these videos I'll be working through my Christmas stash and play a few games, and in February I'll usually just get through one big one like Persona 5 or Oddworld Soulstorm. This year though, since I started my new job in January, my free time, as I've just said, was a bit more limited, so I only got through Pokemon. Conversely though, it was February this year that got the multiple games, and platforming was very much the name of the game. Well, Klonoa, actually, is the name of the game. I've known about Klonoa for a little while. I've seen his face, smiled at him, but never really got to know him, you know? I was happy to see that this HD remaster of the first 2 games when they got announced, and being curious enough about them for a little while, I asked for them for Crimbo, and what I got, certainly what I wasn't expected. While I played the game, taking in its well-designed levels which take full advantage of a basic but intuitive moveset, designing platforming challenges to really put those skills to the test in various contexts, and always feeling completely fresh, I felt nostalgic. Like, I was sat there at the halfway point in the game with this weird nostalgic bliss as I tossed my foes around, like, but this is my first time playing this game, so I was confused, but it still felt really, really nice. Like, I don't know, I still can't explain it like 9 months later. Maybe it's because it's originally a PS1 game and I'm super big into PS1 and 2 stuff, I guess that could be it, but playing this felt like I was revisiting something from my childhood, and I really did like that. This game, as I said, is just really well designed. The idea of having to use enemies to both double jump and hurt other foes is excellent, meaning that in certain situations you're having to act and think quickly to get through the surprisingly, increasingly difficult stages, and chaining enemy grabs into jumps and flurs together to scale great heights is insanely rewarding. The game also has some light puzzle solving, getting pretty freaky with the Z-axis and making you think using your brain, and it meant that none of these levels ever felt the same, and whether through the puzzles, the platforming, or setting, I was always having a blast. The bosses are also similarly really neat, each of them using the axis and the mechanics of enemies being tools for offense and movement in various ways. The game also, as I said, gets surprisingly challenging by the end, which is really neat, really making you use everything you've learned by the final stretch, and the end of the game it's insane. Like, I haven't felt like this towards the ending of a game ever. I don't want to say a single word about it, but it left me so genuinely befuddled and upset, but in a really good way, and I also felt really contented. I don't know, I think that last part is due to the short length, but having levels that are entirely unique, never using the same puzzle or challenge twice, it is a complete little package that I could absolutely see myself calling perfect. It came, it did a job and left, and did it without fail. So naturally, I jumped right into the sequel immediately after finishing the first game, a little worried that it wouldn't meet the same level of pure bliss that the first one gave me, and nope, I was completely wrong. It's very much on par with its predecessor. Klonoa 2 switches some things up from the first game, but still has the same great Z-axis shenanigans and platforming at its core, using variants like new enemy types with different gimmicks to spice up the simple puzzles, which ensure that some of these genuine head-scratchers feel super rewarding to solve. This game isn't just more of the same though, as it has some pretty significant changes from the first game, like the world map being overhauled to feature some instances of branching paths and locations purely being for cutscenes. This is different from the simple children's book presentation of the first game's map, but I wouldn't call it better or worse, simply a different take that really does a good job of illustrating your journey. The story's also a little different too. The first had a rather simple story with some really shocking developments that ended on a genuinely rattling and bittersweet note. The second tells a more involved story with cutscenes to enjoy, but both inside and outside of levels that by the end delivers a really poignant message and ends on a less harrowing note, which shows how Klonoa has changed as a character. The game also mixes up gameplay too, introducing the snowboard slide stages, which the first time I saw I popped off for hard. This is such a PS1 or 2 level gimmick that's just gone in the modern day, so seeing it here as a way to add some variety to the style of level you play was nice, and it's still having the same platform and jump mechanics as the regular game helps it feel like less of a random inclusion. Klonoa 2 is different from the first one in some ways, but keeps how amazing it feels to play and solve it at its core. I don't think anyone who enjoys platformers should ever skip these two. They're both immensely enjoyable and have their own strengths and spectacle, and the presentation of two really helps it to stand on its own. And from increased spectacle, we'll finish off February's platforming bonanza with a return to some simplicity. I've been wanting to get new Super Lucky's Tale ever since it came over to the Switch in 2019 after being an Xbox exclusive alongside the likes of Cuphead. It looked like something that would be right up my alley. Simplistic little platformer, plenty of collecting, you know what I like. After nearly 4 years, I finally got it since it was on sale for 15 quid or so, and it was exactly what I'd hoped it would be. A simplistic little platformer with plenty to collect. Lucky has a nice little moveset, quite standard, but with the addition of his digging, it serves to set him apart from his peers within the genre, with digging on a more solid floor giving him a fun little slide too. I enjoyed using these moves to explore each of the levels on offer here, each with well hidden secrets that will help you to complete the optional objectives the game gives you, collecting 300 coins, finding the secret page, and gathering all of the letters of Lucky's name. Hitting 100% was pretty natural as I played, and the extra challenges needed to do this didn't feel forced since they aren't mandatory. Each hub has a different type of extra challenge, whether it's block sliding puzzles, ball rolling, or combat encounters. They also have auto-runner type of levels knocking about in each hub world, and they were a nice pace breaker from the platforming. Felt nice and rhythmic, and alongside the other optional stuff, they added some nice variety and were short enough to not become obtuse. Even the optional extra world for the secret ending didn't make these too taxing, with the boss rematches and hardest platforming stages in the game balancing out these extra levels. I also really liked the world of Super Lucky's Tale. Like, the characters were all really charming, like the peaceful wrestling yetis, the farmer worms, and the carnival ghosts. They're just, as I said, charming, and honestly that's a word for the game at large. It's nothing mega impressive, but it's cozy, fun, and yeah, charming. It has a lot of really nicely designed platforming levels, mixes stuff up well with the auto runners and extra stages, and keeps things short enough that it never feels like it's dragging its feet. It's a simple, well-designed platformer with lots of collecting that I would recommend without hesitation, and does leave me wanting more from Lucky. There's no official word, but I think a sequel could be really, really fun. So it just kind of turned out that the first few months of this year were completely dominated by platformers, and this was one I saw featured on a video by HOORAY, who I recommend you all give a watch if you're not already. His horror and platforming content are sublime, like some of the best on the platform, and he's just got a really good grasp of what both genres are about and how to make like platforming games good, and how horror can be so effective at conveying different types of scares, and he just does a superb job. He mixes in his own thoughts with his mechanical breakdowns of every game he covers. Have a look if you're not already. In his video discussing various different indie 3D platformers, he didn't say much about HOORAY 3D, other than it was super cheap, super short, but super fun. And at 89p, the price of just under 2 Freddos, I thought, hey, why not? And I gave it a go. Super short is pretty accurate, to be blunt, with the game's 8 main stages and 8 remixes only taking me about an hour to get through while collecting every star. Don't let this deter you though, as while the game is short, the platforming it delivers is really satisfying. Good weight, nice movement, and well-designed courses to navigate all coming together to make something really nice. There's genuinely not much else to say. Play it. It's really simple fun. It's so fun, in fact, that I immediately bought the sequel for the exact same price. The story picks up exactly where the first left off, which is something so simple and wacky, I'll just let you see it for yourself. HOORAY 2 makes things way faster paced, with the main difference between the two games being these speed boosters scattered through each level, which really ramp up the pace and help diversify the simplistic movement of the original. It's rather clear that someone on this dev team was a massive fan of specifically Metal Harbor from SA2, from one of these stages in particular, and the speed this one brings is something that fans of him would really enjoy. The added speed also makes a lot of these platforming stages really intense, and adds an extra dimension at what it was established in the first game. What really sets this one apart though, I feel, are the extra stages you get after beating the game, experimenting with more open stages where you're exploring to find things instead of just being on linear tracks. They're very interesting little stages, which I presume are experimentation for a third game. I hope that's the case anyway. I honestly think a mix of these more open levels with the linear stages the game already does so well could be really, really fun and fresh, if, of course, that's exactly what these stages are for. Both of the HOORAY games are great fun. Something short bursts you can blast through and be done with in 2 hours between the two of them, but leave you feeling incredibly satisfied, like, man, I paid less than I would for a pint of Bud Light and spoons and got the chance to jump around? The satisfaction I felt after beating both was wild. Like eating a pack of Starburst, but keeping them all in your mouth and making them into a lovely big ball, and you keep... That's not normal, that's not... But you get what I mean, right? The fun didn't stop there though, as one more game from that HOORAY video was still in my sights. Super Kiwi 64 is another game I spent less than £3 on, beat within 2 hours 100%, but felt mega satisfied coming away from and while playing it. This one is a pure homage to the N64 style platformers, hence the name obviously, and has you playing as a Kiwi with a wing pack that lets him glide. In addition to this, he can jump, sprint, do a spinning attack with his beak, which is useful for a few different things, like movement, defending yourself from like the 3 different types of enemies, interacting with the buttons, and most importantly, sticking into walls for a pseudo wall jump. This is one where the movement was the main source of enjoyment, blasting around these cozily designed open spaces to grab goodies while mixing in all of my moves felt really nice, and not quite on the level of the likes of Banjo, Hat in Time, or Mario Odyssey, but like certainly getting there. And honestly, the 8 levels the game features are really simply designed, and the game as a whole can be blasted through, again, in around an hour and a half. For that hour and a half, though, I was having some of the most pure platforming fun I've had in quite a long time. For the first time ever, I found myself being like, yeah, I could speedrun this game, that'd be fun. and then I proceeded not to attempt to, but oh well. You know, the fact that I had that thought, surely that's got to mean something, right? This game is really, really great. It also felt really nice that every game I played this month wasn't necessarily a massive time investment, but they were also really, really enjoyable, like just simple little ones that I could just blow through and feel nice about at the end. And I don't know, I enjoy long games for sure, but I've got like 5 games in my backlog that I know are like 15 plus hours, so these shorter guys do a nice job just to go through and enjoy, you know what I mean? It finally happened. I admit I'm feeling pretty conflicted. He's been a massive part of my life since I was little, and I've met some of my closest friends because of him. He's let me down, sure, but he's brought me a lot of joy, and surely that equals it out, right? Oh wait, it's an April funny! The Murder of Sonic the Hedgehog is the second game Sonic Team have unveiled on April Fool's Day, the other being Shadow the Hedgehog, and this one is far superior. In fact, I dare go as far to say that it also outmatches Forces, which, a fun fact, it also beats in terms of length too. Another quaint game that took me 2 hours to get through, MOSTH, which is just really satisfying to say, is a treat provided for us all to enjoy, giving us fun new designs for the characters and some nice interactions between them all. Another step forward after Frontiers, which, funnily enough, this game is actually a direct follow-up to. It has some nice twists, which actually has you doing some sleuthing, and has some moments and gags that'll make you chuckle, and others that really reminded me why I enjoy these characters so much. I was about to list a bunch of specific characters who I really enjoyed interacting with, but then I found myself just listing every character in the game, so yeah, this game's really nice. It's free to play and available right this second, so if you're a Sonic fan, you have no excuse not to experience this one. A charming little reminder that the series is slowly remembering exactly what made it so beloved. But enough of this poo-poo baby gaga wow-wow stuff that only takes 2 hours because you'll get tired. I earn a wage. I don't want to hop and bop like a toddler who's stupid. I want to grab and stab with my mate Kratos and his little baby boy. Last year, God of War 1 and 2 were in my top 10, but I postulated how playing them would impact my thoughts when I eventually got around to playing this game, as it seemed so vastly different to the roots of the series, making hacking and slashing taking a backseat to walking and talking with your little bundle of joy. God of War 2018 is a game that initially I was forcing myself to play a little bit. It wasn't terrible, axe combat felt restrictive yet satisfying. It was kinda neat to see Kratos in this completely different light. Puzzles and exploring just off the beaten path were rewarding, but like, I don't know, it was fine. I wasn't really getting why so many people raved about the game, and I ended up taking a week off or so from it absent-mindedly. When I went back to it though, it felt like something, I guess, just clicked. I ended up getting to the Lake of Nine and journeying to Alfheim, and from there, that's where the game really picked up from me. The puzzles were super interesting, the combat made more sense to me, the character interactions and moments started hitting more for me, and from there, I think I understood this game a lot better. My initial wariness, I think, was because my expectations I developed off the back of playing the first 2 games last year, but as I got more used to this one, I accepted that things weren't going to be the same, and I ended up enjoying it more. One thing I found nice all the way through were the interactions between Kratos and Atreus. This father-son bond that develops over the course of the journey is really nice to watch unfold. I enjoyed seeing Kratos as a character in this game, dealing with stuff like loss in a way that isn't just channeling it into rage as he tries to be a better man for the sake of his son and wants to instill good lessons in the boy. Atreus' responses to the world around him are cool too, and when he becomes dead bratty after learning he's a god, it was just really fun to see how he bounced off his dad in comparison to other points of the game and where it leads him in the end. These interactions are only enhanced when Mimir joins the party, adding a third perspective on the world as well as being a good expositor of lore and world building that feels natural and serves to build up characters we don't even meet like Odin, Thor and Tyr, who are likely for the sequel. This is a God of War game though, and the last time I talked about one, I spent time talking about spectacle, combat, puzzles, but here I've spoken mostly about characters, and That's because that's the real focus this time. The gameplay is in service of the characters and story, and for what it's worth, I really enjoyed both. In a similar way to God of War 2 not giving bosses health bars being a great presentational choice, the fact that the game presents the game as just one long mission, the journey, which just so happens to have multiple long elaborate steps, really sells Kratos and Atreus' drive to complete their goal. Of course, the gameplay is also good, by the way, just putting that out there. I can't have a game without it after all. The combat and puzzles that the series is known for are still here, though aren't as major of a focus, with segments of climbing and bonding bits like bow training also mixed in here, as well as there being just generally more cutscenes. Puzzles are here, but not terribly complex, usually just either throw axe at this to freeze it or throw axe at this to smash it. There's not a massive amount of variety, but because the axe is so satisfying to throw and recall, they all felt satisfying enough. The axe, of course, isn't just for puzzles, and I'm happy to say that the combat is still satisfying. Different for sure, but satisfying. Ahoying my axe into an enemy to freeze them while barreling towards another to batter him with my fist before recalling my axe and finishing off both guys with a heavy strike never got old. Nor did getting assists from Atreus when the occasion called for it with his summons and arrows. And things only got better after I got the Blades of Exile back, which felt beautiful and weighty like the axe, but with added properties like wider reach and burning enemies, making them feel just as special as the initial weapon. It's not your usual God of War combat from the first 5 games. It's very different, but by the end I didn't mind the change that much, and certainly didn't think it was boring like I feared I would. I probably would have liked it even more if I hadn't realised I could upgrade my special attacks only after beating the game, but that's on me. Though I did find that the menus generally for equipping and upgrading stuff were a little obtuse, but now that I know how they function fully, I don't mind them as much. The new take on something I really liked from last year may not have hit it off with me at first, but by the end of the journey, I found myself incredibly eager to get to Ragnarok to see where things go, as I literally know nothing about what happens in that game in contrast to knowing pretty much everything about this one prior to playing it. I have, however, promised myself I won't buy anything long and new until I finish my backlog, or most of it, which is still rather hefty from Christmas and January sales. This one is a winner, for different reasons than the others that precede it, but I'm really happy I finally gave it a go. And hey, let's keep it rolling with stuff that's weirdly different to the rest of its series. From Sonic in a point-and-click to Kratos in a game more about story than gameplay, we now have Bayonetta in a weird puzzle-adventure game. We waited so long for Bayo 3 to show us anything of itself, and then 4 months after it eventually comes out, they give us another entry in the series made by a different team. It felt mega odd to see this one revealed, and to actually then remember it was out when I saw it in Smith's, I couldn't help but grab it, alongside another I'll talk about later. Cereza and the Lost Demon isn't your typical Bayonetta game, filling a sizable gap before the events of Bayonetta 3. We explore Cereza's childhood for the first time and see what happened to her after the events of the first Bayonetta, being set in a new location and giving the player control of both a young, timid and incredibly inexperienced Cereza, as well as her hulking demonic companion residing in a stuffed cat, Cheshire. The game is incredibly charming, presenting itself as a storybook which adds to the whimsy of the setting of this game, Avalon Forest, even having a narrator provide exposition as well as just flat out telling you the story as you go, again as if it's an actual storybook being read aloud. There's some really nice interactions and development between the two main characters over the course of the game, and their relationship progresses nicely, though it leaves me wondering, is this meant to be the same Cheshire we see in Bayo 3? Or not? I'm leaning towards not, but you never really know. Each of the locations you visit do a good job of setting themselves apart from one another, despite all being within the same forest, and provide a good bit of room for exploration. The game is linear, but it has you unlocking new abilities and power-ups for Cheshire as you go, meaning by the end you can go and explore the whole map and gather those missed collectibles, feeling a bit like a Metroidvania. As we all saw last year, I've grown as a person and no longer avoid those types of games, and exploring the map at the end of of things to grab what I missed with my expanded ability list felt really satisfying, as did the rest of the game when I was sat there controlling 2 characters at one time and doing combat all within that. Things work very differently compared to the other Bayo games for combat. No witch time, no summoning, no torture attacks, no switching weapons, none of it. In fact, Cereza herself can only ensnare enemies with thorns as a way of restricting them, leaving Cheshire to be the one actually dealing with the various fairies that come at you. There's a very healthy variety of enemies here, and actually most require you to use different powers you accrue across the game to take them down. At the start, things may seem a bit repetitive, but as you upgrade both characters, things get quicker and quicker and quicker, until you're zipping around the battlefield, combining all your skills and controlling both in complete sync to undo your enemies. It is so satisfying by game's end, and provides a real sense of growth, which is perfect for the game itself, being about young Cereza wanting to grow stronger. I could also gush about the last 2 hours, but I won't, because there's something that hits so much harder when you don't know it's coming. There's actually quite a few neat twists and sequences towards the end, and the game continues the trend the series has of having a class final boss. Honestly, I'd rank this one above Bayo 2. Like God of War, it's very different from what came before, but I wouldn't be opposed to seeing something else like it in the future.
Future!
10 sodding years. 10 years since me and some of my friends saw the first of the legendary Godzilla films, and I went home, neglecting a rather hefty GCSE Maths revision booklet to play Battle for Bikini Bottom for the first time. I'd gone to CEX and grabbed a box for the movie game, only to find that this was enclosed instead. I'd heard things about it, and after failing to return it because they'd allegedly sold the movie game disc in the Battle for Bikini Bottom box by accident, I played through it, and Christ, I loved it. It's pretty much the licensed game for most people, right? It goes well beyond what it needed to do and had just enough jank and oddness to become legendary amongst the wider gaming space. As someone who loves both BFBB and licensed PS2-esque games in general, you'd assume that I'd love its sequel, right? Well, love is a strong word, and I do like Cosmic Shake, but I don't know if love is appropriate. I mean, whoa, hey, we're only just getting to know each other. Cosmic Shake has a lot of what made BFBB a classic, providing great platforming, charming animation, and recognizable characters, but I think it misses the mark in a couple of key places, mainly in the way its levels and objectives are handled. It has the same solid platforming the previous game had, but the level design philosophy is a tad different. Things are far more linear this time, with less nooks and crannies to explore the first time through a level, with most being walled behind abilities you'll be granted later on, and meaning that you're more restrictive to the path the levels want you to go down. This was the case in Battle for Bikini Bottom 2 to an extent, but there having bits and bobs to go for in place of the main objective kept those levels feeling expansive and deceptively open despite their actually quite linear nature. This also meant you can't dip back and forth between levels quickly to snipe objectives you can now complete, as the points you can spawn in within the levels are now just checkpoints within the levels themselves, and not actual goals you're looking to achieve. Not that there are many extraneous objectives anyway, mind you, just a scavenger hunt for extra collectibles that only appears once you talk to a specific NPC after first beating a given level. The levels also feel really short, like I felt it most when rescuing Squidward, but on the whole, most levels feel really small compared to its predecessor. What we do have though is by no means bad, and I would like to stress that. I think it's quite easy to compare this game to what came before, as that's exactly what it was marketed to be, a full-blown sequel to Battle for Bikini Bottom, but it has its own merits too. While all the locales, say from 2, are recycled wholesale from Battle for Bikini Bottom, each of them have a multi-dimensional twist, like Jellyfish Fields as the Wild West, Goo Lagoon as a pirate-infested bay, or Rock Bottom during Halloween. Each level also does a nice job of telling an isolated story, building your arrival and adventuring through the world into a smaller narrative of saving a friend. The overworld also got an overhaul, with a multitude of NPCs to converse with, collectibles to find, and side objectives to take up. Helps to give the whole connective tissue between the levels some good life. Each level also felt really unique, and they all had their own vibes to them, most also including isolated, more open sections for you to explore, substituting well for the extra objectives that unlock only later. Also, I'm not usually one for them, but the alternative costumes you can use are a real bloody treat, taking far and wide from the lifespan of the series to produce some excellent looks for SpongeBob. So while I don't find it quite as charming as the game it's trying to live up to, Cosmic Shake, I say, can stand alongside its older brother, albeit quite heavily in its shadow. And since we're talking about measuring up to an older sibling, something I, as an only child, would never have to experience, Sackboy: A Big Adventure has some very large shoes to fill. The original Little Big Planet games were huge parts of not just mine, but my friends' childhoods. Creating levels or playing through the enormous amount that others had created on the two original games was, at the time, a truly unforgettable and mind-blowing experience. And the cobbled together feel of each level of the main story, as well as its offbeat weirdo soundtrack, gave the entire experience this weird, homemade, incredibly cozy vibe which, when paired with its funnily clunky control scheme and cornucopia of user-generated content, made it a must-play for the PS3 at the time it came out. A decade later though, Sackboy sheds the user-generated nature of his origins to bring us this game. Sackboy: A Big Adventure was free on PS Plus a little while ago, and I've been curious about it given how it was shown off prior to release, and wanted to try it, but had other things I wanted to clear up first at that time. Finally getting round to it though, I'd say that I like it. It's a very charming, solidly made 3D platformer, which was very much in the same vein as Mario 3D World and New Super Lucky's Tale, which, by the way, if you're in the UK, check your local B&M. I saw the Switch version there for £10. That is a steal. The game alters its vibe slightly from the thrown-together feel of the original, trading it in for a professionally knitted atmosphere which feels more cohesive but still manages to visually charm you. The designs of the characters we meet are really nice, being made of bits and bobs you'd find around a home, with the enemies and sackfolk being knitted or sewn together looking. This scene extends into the main villain, Vex, who completely steals the show with his writing, animation and voice work, all the while being named after that one PS2 game. He balances menace and levity so well, and commands attention every time he's on screen. The levels themselves are quite well designed, each having lots of collectibles to grab to either earn a gold trophy, used to buy cosmetics, dress up your character, or just help you progress. Each is going to have 3 to 5 of these dreamer orbs, and finding them is usually quite fun. It challenges you to take the harder path or use your abilities to grab it, a la the green stars in 3D World. My only real quibble with the gameplay is from Sackboy himself, as out of the gate, he does feel a little funky to control. Not like bad, but he has a 3-hit combo which feels weird, and he has this rolling and the fluttered jumping and diving feels really strange. Like, they should do more than they do, but they're still satisfying, but like, just sort of Every level you use these abilities, and some extras the game grants you from time to time are super unique. There's even a couple set entirely to licensed songs, one of which in World 4 made me pog my bloody clogs. The platform here is far more satisfying than in LBP, and the levels are designed to encourage exploration much better with the fluid design, and that's great if you're okay with trading off a decent chunk of the charm that LBP had to get this solid platforming. If that sounds like something you're okay with, then check it out. The game is still incredibly charming. And with that, I can say, hip hip hooray! 25 years of me! And what better way to celebrate is there than by beating nothing? Yeah, June ended up being a really turbulent month. And while I did start 2 games, I didn't finish either of them, so, happy birthday, me? I did have a lovely time having a great birthday party with my friends, though. I went out in Newcastle and had lots of drinks and had a really fun time. And yeah, I'm very, very lucky to have the company that I keep. So yeah, that was lovely, despite June, as I said, being a very turbulent month. So on to July. And for my birthday, the sole video game I received was this. With a pretty hectic month behind me, I turned my attention at the start of July to begin playing through God of War Ragnarok in my free time. As I said earlier, after beating the 2018 game and being able to appreciate it on its own merits and as a next step for the series, I was incredibly eager to get into this one completely blind, and as I'm writing this, I'm quite unsure of how in depth I want to go because this game is one which I think is best experienced blind, hence why I'm going to be using trailer footage instead of my own gameplay from the post-game. Everything about this game has been expanded upon or touched up by Santa Monica Studios in the 4 years between the 2018 game and this, with every system, while carrying over, gaining some additional depth or new things to make it even more customizable and fun. The game looks to improve itself and be better in any way it can, adding more variety to scenarios, puzzles, combat, and exploration, which help to expand and diversify it from the first game. Combat is as satisfying as ever, but with the understanding I'd gained from the previous game for how upgrading abilities and gear worked, I felt more capable from the start. Adding in additional ways to customize your armor and weapons with different attacks and traits made navigating the slightly more obtuse menus even more rewarding than previously, and switching between weapons to wreak havoc upon my foes felt far more satisfying than in the 2018 game. This is partially to do with the fact that you start off with the Blades of Chaos this time, and can be more flexible from the beginning, but also because the game rewards you for diversifying the moves you're using, allowing you the ability after a set number of uses to unlock modifiers for each of the parts of Kratos' arsenal, adding additional stun, damage, momentum, or elemental stacking to them once you've utilised them, in rewarding you for trying out everything you unlock through the game instead of just sticking to a dominant strategy. I didn't mention it in the 2018 portion of this video, but the music for both it and Ragnarok are brilliant, knowing exactly when to quiet down or ramp up depending on the story beats and gameplay situations, which are far more varied within this game. Each of the 9 realms you explore do have their own personality, which makes fully fleshing them out through exploration throughout the game and post-game feel especially rewarding. I'm slowly chipping through to try and get 100% of the stuff, and I'm still having fun despite having finished all of the main stuff ages ago at time of writing. Exploration is really encouraged as you're going through the game, with the characters, after you complete a main story mission, often encouraging you to take a pause before continuing along the main path to get a taste for what the different levels have to offer. I did this a bit, especially at the start, and found myself really enjoying taking on some of these side missions, but as the game's tale took turn after turn, I was far more bothered about getting through the story because it had hooked me that much. This did mean it was a bit of a shame though, because the side content here is really enjoyable and helps make each of the environments you visit, both old and new, feel far fresher and more fleshed out than in 2018, kind of making that game in comparison look a bit restrictive because there's just so much here in terms of location variety and objectives to complete. This expansion in relation to locations is coupled with an increase in scope and variety for boss fights. No more fighting the same dude over and over again, outside of a few optional bosses later on that is. This game's fights, while not as brutal as prior entries, certainly are a step up from what we had in the 2018 game, with the beginning, end, and a certain large fight in the middle serving to blow anything the 2018 game had out of the water. Speaking of 2018, I can't conclude this bit without mentioning the story properly. Everything in this game is in service of telling an emotional, climactic, and compelling story, and it still stuns me after loving the older stuff from the series last year that I'd be so compelled to play the game, not because of its fun and satisfying gameplay, but because of its engaging and well-told story. Like the gameplay mechanics and world design, it feels as though everything you do with the story of the game was dialed up an extra few notches. Right from the off, you can feel how things have changed over the 2 years between the ending of God of War 2018 and the opening of this game. The opening sequence of this game exemplifies straight away how things have changed. The dynamic between Kratos and Atreus is once again the focus, but you can totally feel how their time together during the first game changed their relationship. The supporting cast are back in force with a couple of new additions and all are written well, so again, I found myself compelled by the halfway point to just go for the main story because I wanted to see more of all of the cast. I found myself myself at a certain point of playing, talking to a friend, explaining what was happening. I was like, hang on, why in a God of War game am I more bothered about family drama than cutting folk to bits? I think, though, that's part of the beauty of this new phase of the series. It did one thing incredibly well at its inception and has managed to pivot to doing something completely different just as well, going for a series renowned for its gameplay to one revered for its story. And, like, when you think about it, that's nuts, man. I like as well how, now that it's out in the open just who and what Kratos is in the world of this game, that it takes full advantage to try and tie some things explicitly together, being less scared than 2018 to be like, yeah, this is a God of War game and is tied to the rest of the series. And in this way, it actually ends up bringing the whole series together in some really nice ways, even the PSP stuff. The bit of the game that had stuck with me the most, though, is its ending, like literally the final cutscene. The only game to ever make me cry was Kingdom Hearts 3, and let me tell you, Ragnarok got close to becoming number 2 on that list. I'm not going to spoil what happens, but the impact it has on the series at large, and one character in particular, is huge. It's a brilliant way to end the game, and supposedly this section of the franchise. So yeah, if you can't tell, I like this one a lot, way more than I initially did the 2018 game, and I'm happy that I've finally experienced all of the main portions of this series. It's been an absolute blast. Here it is! The point where FF7 becomes everything I thought it was before I played the original. Crisis Core is like if you pluck Cloud from the very end of FF7, like when he reverts to just being a normal dude in a weirdo world, and made a whole game around that situation. Zack is a lovely man who has a goal and a job. He has colleagues he works alongside and a girlfriend he meets at church. He's an everyman where you might see Sephiroth at Sainsbury's. The edge in this game is a sharp departure from what I found a couple of years ago when I played the original, and it resulted in me both laughing out loud and being like, a couple of times. Like when the main villain, whose name is Genesis Valentine, by the way, trips Zack over when he's leaving the house of a friend's mum that's about to be bombed after finding her dead, and the main villain just starts monologuing at him. Zack's only response is just to shout, "Shut up, I'm warning you," and the dude just ignores him and keeps going. It's really special, and as the game goes on, it keeps getting more and more edgy to the point where I'm like, they knew what they were doing, right? Like, part of me is thinking surely they were in on the joke of how over the top and ridiculous this game is, and then I remember that it's Nomura and friends involved in this, and then I'm like, maybe he just thinks this is cool. Conversely, there's also when Zack's about to go to Nibelheim with Sephiroth, when everything's kicking off and the very big bad thing from FF7 that everyone knows about is just about to happen, and he says to Eren, "Oh, don't worry, babe, I'm gonna be back in a couple days, I'll see you then," and I'm like, right-yo then. And then there's also the revelation that Aerith was writing to Zack every day he was away, sorting out Nibelheim, dealing with Sephiroth's breakdown, and that in FF7, when him and Cloud were experimented on, it wasn't for a couple of days, it was 4 years, and Aerith, after he says, "I'll be back in a couple of days," never sees him again, never gets a reply from him, and is just left in the slums on her own. Stuff like that really adds to the original narrative of FF7, or at the very least, you know, gave me a laugh, made me think that's funny, that's just ridiculous. But on the larger scale, I wouldn't say I was really fussed on the narrative of just this game. Like, did I need to know that Zack was the one who named Seventh Heaven, but not with Tifa, with some random construction dude who's just like, "Oh, I'm building a bar." Like, did I need to know that? Did I need clones and mutating into monsters and angels and demons and making sure, like, you're the perfect life form? And I don't think I did. I think FF7 has enough of in its world, like, that you could just expand upon that, and I don't think that these were the ways to pull it in, especially with the double down on the edgier aspects and a departure from the downtrodden dystopian world with a lot of heart. Was the story outright bad? Maybe. It was funny. And again, I don't think it was meant to be, and at other points, it just feels like it's dragging. Like, I don't know, I think after the whole Nibelheim incident, I'm just like, okay, let's keep going. Or after it feels like you fight the final boss in the middle of the game, and then half the cast just disappears so it can bounce back to being the FF7 story for a little bit, and then bounces back into its own thing. Like, I don't know, I just don't think it was for me, which is a real shame, because FF7 has a really neat, really well built up story, and Crisis Core just doesn't have that. But that's just the story, and when we get round to the gameplay, I can give this game one of the biggest compliments I can give it, in that Crisis Core, despite this major facelift that the remake on PS5 gives it, still feels like a PSP game. And from me, you know what I'm like. I love me PS1, me PS2, and the PSP is just a portable PS2, so, you know, that's huge coming from me. It retains all the charm that I'm assuming the original had, and adds some interesting aspects alongside the remake combat system to make things feel pretty neat, namely command melding. And the command melding gave me a big Birth by Sleep vibe, you know, like, it's very similar, and honestly, when I'm thinking on it, I'm assuming this is where the command melding in BBS comes from, but there, it feels like you have to work to level up your commands, get the best bits and bobs, and break the game in half from there. And here it's like, I got Faraga, Thundaga, Blizzaga, and their dark variants like 5 hours in, which is just before the halfway point, and then that was it. The game was simply over. There was nothing that could touch me. Even the harder fights towards the end of the game, like the final boss or Sephiroth in the Nibelheim reactor, just couldn't touch me. I was ripping through anything in my path, barely acknowledging the weakness system the game has, and I was like a force of nature. And I don't know, I think that actually, in the end, detracted from the game for me, because I wasn't mega into the story, as I said, and then the game being able to be broken so easily, it made me autopilot quite a bit. Again, it does have a lot of charm to it in terms of its gameplay, and it's neat, but as I said, it wasn't quite enough to carry it all the way for me. While the charm of Crisis Core wasn't quite enough to carry it all the way, charm is something this next one has in spades. The original Psychonauts was this unobtainable presence when I was younger. I knew about the game from Scottish Duck 17's Let's Play of it. A friend of mine called Miles did one a few years later, and it was like, this game looks so cool and kooky and weird, and it wouldn't be until 2015, 5 years since I'd first learned about it, that I'd finally be able to play it for myself, and I ended up really enjoying it. Super surreal and just the neatest game I'd ever played. A proper weirdo game for freaks. And you know I love weirdo games for freaks. Naturally, when the second game was announced, I was mega excited. I didn't pick it up though until this year when I saw it in game and the special edition, and I was like, oh god, yeah, right, that's out, isn't it? That was like April time. The astute amongst you may have noticed that this is the August segment of the video, so even then I still didn't get right around to it. I still had some other fish to fry at the time, you know. What this meant though is that when I did get round to it, the time was completely right. I had a proper hankering for a shorter scale game and a bit of platforming, and alongside the time being right, the game was right. This, no joke, may be one of my new favourite games of all time. And to be completely transparent from the start, it's amazing. All the style of the first game is here. The visuals are brilliant. The style of each level is so distinct, and the designs of the levels, enemies, and characters mesh so brilliantly with the world that was established all the way back in 2005. The game sounds class too. A mesh of couple of old tunes and some amazing new compositions really suit every environment and level, and oh my god, the levels, they're all weird, and they're all unique, and they're all just so fun to be in. Set pieces, platforming challenges, boss fights, collectibles, it's all so thought out, so considered, and so well placed into each world that each and every place you go is so difficult to not enjoy. A huge standout is the questionable area, which, while smaller than the campgrounds from the first game, has so much platforming just baked into it for you to enjoy whenever you fancy. It's one of the most perfect hub worlds ever. It's so incredible, and the secrets and conversations are so rewarding to find and experience. Your powers and how you use them are so cool too. They scrapped a couple from the original game that weren't so intuitive, and added a couple of new ones and retuned the others to have wider purposes than ever before. What this means is that platforming is so kinetic, so mobile, so satisfying, and it also means that, crucially, combat is too. This might be some of, if not the best platformer combat ever. Each power, whether in combination or isolation, feels so good to use, and the fact that pretty much every power has a use for both platforming and combat is just really, really cool to me. Like, the fact that they thought these things through for two completely distinct purposes, for two completely different aspects of the game, is just, it's mind-boggling. There's also the story, which acts as a direct continuation to the original 3 days after the events of Camp Whispering Rock. It starts off with the charm of the original and then keeps going, slowly turning more emotional, and by the end, really investing me in everything that was going on, and I wasn't expecting to be so deeply invested in it. But hey, they got me. That's the real strength of the characters speaking for themselves, bringing this narrative from fun and kooky all the way to emotional and investing and making you question certain characters that you thought you knew, and that's just a real credit to how the characters themselves and the narrative as a whole are written. If I had to go and give a couple of points, I think, where we could tune the game up a bit, the final boss is probably the weakest fight in the game. I was so strong and adept with my powers that I just blew through it, and the ending to the fight really feels like they wanted to do some like big homage to the end of the first game, but it ends up feeling more like a less cool rehash. It's just a lot less cool in its execution. Also, and this isn't a real negative, I guess, but the game certainly leans more heavily into the platforming than the first game ever did, and it has a lot less level-specific intricacies and gimmicks that made the first one so memorable, but what they're replaced with is super satisfying platforming that's really well designed and just feels good to do, like, to put it bluntly. So, like, as I said, it's not really a negative, just something that's different and skews the game much further into being a platformer than having the adventure game elements the first game had because of the history of the studio producing it. Which is something, actually, I had the pleasure of learning more about, and the development of this game at large, because of this 31-part docu-series produced by Double Fine and their internal filming crew. Watching the game and the VR spin-off made to help fund it come together and really getting a better idea of how it is to develop a game was actually really interesting to me, and just another way in which I really learned to appreciate the game as a whole. The game is just really special. From the first one being unobtainable to this one seeming impossible that it could ever happen, to the final product just being impeccable. I didn't finish anything in September. Oops. I mean, I did start a couple of games, but didn't end up finishing either of them in between the start of the new academic year and dropping everything for the final Sonic Frontiers DLC when it came out, and getting to go to Sonic Symphony. Legit, that was like a top 3 life experiences. Just unreal, man. Like, I can now say I have seen Jun Tsunoy and Tomoyo Otani perform live, and it's insane. Just, if you can get yourself there, and they're already talking about doing loads more shows for the UK and US, if you like The Little Freak in any capacity, or just enjoy the music of the series, you owe it to yourself. Speaking of the Little Freak, we'll speak more about him in just a moment. Before we get to him, though, this is a one I was actually recommended by my partner. I'd originally started it in September, but then, as I just said, various bits and bobs came up, and as a result, I ended up putting this one on the bench for a while. When I got back to it, though, I beat it within the hour, so maybe if I just pushed a little more, it could have been a September game, but Oh well, A Little Misfortune actually probably is more of an October game, a game where the main character is a little ray of sunshine who has had it rough, living in a normal-ish world with some really nice spooky undertones. More of a walk and talker than anything else, it does have some funny little quips here and there, as we get guided through this little 3-hour-ish romp with misfortune. The quality of a game like this is really dependent on the strength of the characters within it, again since walking and talking is pretty much the crux of the entire game, and I think Little Misfortune and the two other major characters do a good enough job of keeping you engaged, mostly because of how rotten the game portrays Misfortune's life as being, and you just want to be there for her as she goes through this little part of her life. I say this is mostly talking, and it is, but there's also a couple of collectibles that you'll need for the true ending, which I ended up getting 15 out of 16 of, just innately on my merry way, but missed one right before the end, and there's no chapter select, so it was either do a 3-hour rerun of the game for 20 extra seconds of cutscene, and I'm like, no, that's okay, I'll do it next time. So if you want something short and melancholic to fit right in with autumn in a decently similar vein to Over the Garden Wall, no, not quite as insanely autumnal, then maybe give this one a look. It's a pleasant 3-hour romp with a pleasant girl through her not-so-pleasant life. Here he is. It's in the contract I signed when I got him tattooed on my leg that I have to mention him in my videos at least once a year, so I thought I'd double up and get a leg up on 2024. Superstars was neat to see revealed so soon after Frontiers. I think we'd all assumed it'd be another hefty wait for the next Sonic game, but then this came out of the blue and gave us all an extra fix. Regrettably though, I think that's all this feels like. A quick fix, something to simply consume and then move on. Superstars is quite fun, let's not get mixed up. However, I think that's about as far as I'd go with it. The cast all being here is lovely as ever to see, each of them feeling just as satisfying as ever to play. This is actually also the first time I've proper vibed with Knuckles and Tails in a classic style game. I think it's probably because a chunk of the new environments are designed with a little bit of CD-ness to them, encouraging a tad more exploration than the likes of 2, 3, and K in Mania. They just feel a lot more fun to play than usual for me. Amy is such a nice addition as well, her hammer spin being a nice little variation that makes her unique, and the other playable character that you get to have a go at also has a very neat difference to them that makes their revisits to zones feel a lot more fresh. That was a big relief for me as well, because when I went through the game the first time, only like 2 of the zones made me really be like, wow, like that was a great level. The rest were like, yeah, that was fine. After Mania having exceptional levels for both the wholly original zones and the remixes of familiar ones, it does feel a bit lacking, even if all the zones here are original and have some pretty cool bosses. On the second time round though, I found myself finding a few fair more of them really quite fun. My only mega big gripe I've got with the game are actually some of those bosses I just mentioned, and in a huge shock, the music. Despite having T-Lopes and Jun Sonoe on board, the music comes off a bit and honestly I can't really remember much of it, which for Sonic is a massive shame. I remember the track that I've put on this video, and I remember I remember I remember the first level because I played that one a lot when I was experimenting with the super forms, and that's yes, that's pretty much it, which is, again, wild for a Sonic game. And then after that disappointment, there's also the biggest gripe I have with the game, the ending boss fights. Christ, they aren't great. Most of the bosses I find to be neat. Speed Jungles stand out as having 2 fun ones, Sand Sanctuary and Sky Garden too, but as you hit the final fights of both story routes, things get, quite frankly, unfun, hard to manage. Couple of lovely instant kill attacks, very decent ideas for fights. It's not the Death Egg robot again, which is cool, but not fun at all, unless you have the emeralds and abuse their powers at certain points. And oh yeah, the emeralds have individual powers now. I kind of forgot I have them in the levels, but these 2 final bosses, I really found myself needing them because, again, without them, they weren't fun. At least the true final boss was neat, some baked in bollocks of course like the other 2, but actually fair and challenging, and You know what? I think this might be my favourite classic Sonic final boss. I don't know about that. It throws in an entirely brand new gameplay mechanic for the final hit of the boss, and that wasn't great. Maybe it isn't my favourite. I don't know. All of that aside, I'd probably say Superstars is pretty fun, but that's pretty much about it. It's like a one and done, definitely. It's certainly not Mania 2, which many people were hoping it was going to be, and it certainly could have been if, you know, they hadn't hired the Balan Wonderland people, but it is decent, I suppose. A couple of really neat parts in there too, but worth, like, 54 quid? I certainly wouldn't say so. Tell you what is worth the price of admission though. PS3 demos. Last year I spoke to you about PlayStation 3 demos and how they were a revolution for 10-year-old me. Getting to try stuff out before I buy it, experiencing the opening sections of games to really get myself acquainted with them, and just playing them over and over in lieu of getting the actual game. Alongside Mirror's Edge, the demo for this Ghostbusters game was also one I played the most, and when it was announced for a remaster, I knew what I had to do. Ghostbusters Remastered was just the game I needed at the end of this month. Sufficiently spooky, a peppering of nostalgia, and let me immerse myself in a universe I enjoy. The game, being written by Dan Aykroyd and Harold Ramis, is incredibly faithful to the source material, has everyone written on point, and is just like... Okay, remember that the funny thing to do a while ago, being making fun of any game that, quote, made you feel like X thing? Well, that's what this game does. It makes you feel like a Ghostbuster man, a working-class hero tangoing with the paranormal on the regular. Manually setting traps and wrangling the ghosts into them is something I thought I'd get tired of, but no, I simply didn't. It's the right degree of satisfying and accurate feeling to the source material that it just doesn't get old, wearing down the ghosts with the proton pack before having to wrestle them into the trap. The enemy variety and assortment of gadgets really help this too, each of the different streams having a good enough purpose on their own to feel useful. Of course, there's more to being a Ghostbuster than just attacking the supernatural. You're a scientist, so you've also got access to the PKE meter, which really just brings everything together. Pretty much any time it can glow one of three colours: green to show spiritual activity, red to indicate there's a hidden ghost nearby, and blue to show that there's a highly spiritually charged object, an optional type of collectible, lurking in an area. Using the meter isn't mega complicated, just a game of hot and cold, but it can also be used to help you fill out the Tobin Spirit Guide by getting a couple of good scans on paranormal entities, giving you a nice little bit of information on them as well as what's most useful against them and how they're probably going to attack you. What this also does is give you something else in the combat to do other than just grabbing the ghouls from the outset. It is a small side thing that, again, you don't have to do, but when it's taken alongside the rest of the equipment you have, it just completes that whole feel of being a Ghostbuster. The only real quibble I have with this one are the boss fights felt pretty mashy, I guess. Mashy's not the right word for it, but like, it just felt like, especially for this one boss in the sewers, that I was just wearing down this never-ending wall of just creature and ectoplasm, and I don't know, he was a little less than fun to take down, if I'm being completely honest. But if the low point is one boss fight ways through the game, then hey, that's pretty good. There's honestly not much else to say about this game. It just feels like a third Ghostbusters movie, which just happens to be wholly interactive. It was a game I think I really needed though, some cozy, satisfying fun at the end of a pretty nice month that I've been wanting to experience for quite a while, and honestly, I think it holds up just as well as the demo did when I was 11. And while we're talking about things holding up, let's go even further back than when I was 11 to when I was like 4? I mentioned in the Cyber Chase video that this was one of the games I completed twice as a kid, or rather watched be completed by my cousin. I'd been after a repurchase of this one for a while, remembering just how much fun I used to have watching and occasionally playing it myself. So when my eagle-eyed partner spied it in a retro game shop we frequent, I snatched it up without hesitation and played it with them over the course of a weekend, eager to show them this little slice of my early childhood and one of my first gaming experiences. I actually ended up debating with myself whether this would be featured in the video at all, given, that I've seen the whole thing and experienced it vicariously through my cousin before, but I was like, nah man, it's a game that I played this year, and I want to talk about it, and technically, this is my first time going through beating it, and I don't remember everything from it, so yeah, it's completely fine. As I said before, this game just completely holds up. Controls well, Cusco has a fun but basic moveset which feels nice to use when navigating across the 30 or so levels, which all have a nice variety in objectives, platforming and optional gimmicky bits, as well as some nice puzzle sections later on. The locations and level variety is pretty hefty, while keeping things tied nicely to the film, and I know it's a late PS1 game, but the visuals here look really quite charming still. The thunder in the first sea level really stood out to me too, like how the thunder crackles overhead and then you see the lightning like flash on your screen. I don't know, I just thought that was neat. And the animations also look pretty spectacular as well, which when they're supported by some pretty decent writing, plenty of fourth wall breaks and all that, it makes it feel like a pretty faithful experience. I was also caught quite off guard by just how, not open because they're not like open style fully explorative levels, but like how expansive like the linear levels were. They have a lot of places to explore to really get through each of the objectives and collect what you need, and hey, there's even some hidden secret areas which were nice to uncover as well. And while there's no reward that I know of for 100%, I just enjoyed going for it casually in most of the levels we come across here. The ones that I didn't go for are the gimmicky levels, which I remember from my childhood being quite fun, and yeah, they just still were just as fun as I'd remembered, and going through them myself this time, I really just ended up appreciating how fun I found the game on a whole to be, and honestly, that was the biggest treat of all. I remember thinking this game was great when I was little, but growing up and coming back to it with those memories in mind, and not having to face the fact that, this is just for tiny babies, it was a really nice feeling. Quite clearly, I had great taste as a child, because this one was really satisfying and really lovely to come back to. I reckon I might show my partner A Bug's Life next, because that's another one that I need to revisit and beat for myself. A Bug's Life was not next. I ended up coming back to something I'd stopped playing because the final Sonic Frontiers DLC dropped, but since I was only a couple hours in, it wasn't too hard to pick back up when I eventually brought myself back round to it. I took my time because I didn't really get that into Nier when I initially started playing it. I thought it was fine enough, quite fun, satisfying combat, some neat enemy designs, but nothing really grabbed me, except for, like, the odd location. I also realised I just wasn't in the mood for it, and when I realised I'd been going into Sonic Superstars as soon as it released, I didn't want to keep dropping it and picking it back up, so I decided I'd just come back to it when I really did have a hankering for it. It took a couple months detouring back through Superstars, the Sonic Frontiers DLC, and Ghostbusters, but eventually I did come back to Nier, and the second I progressed past the part I'd left off at, I found myself barreling down a deep rabbit hole as I ploughed through the rest of the game. And make no mistake, it took me ages to work myself up to even wanting to go back to Nier, because I simply wasn't sure if I wanted to go back to it and commit 20 plus hours to something I just worried would wear me out and wear itself thin by the end. All that said, my mate Jacob insisted I go back to it and experience it. We have incredibly similar taste in games, and it's in his top 3 of all time, so it stood to reason that at some point it would probably click with me. I kept wondering when that point would be though, and when I did go back to it, I was still kinda forcing myself to. Stupid boy! Stupid boy! Nier Automata is incredible. I can't properly go into why I think this is the case because it would completely soil the experience, but from a narrative perspective, this game is very cool. Like, within a single game, maybe the most cool experience I've had with a narrative purely based on how it's structured, and what that means I don't want to say. Before I played it, I heard people talking about how incredible the story is, and while playing it I was like, yeah, I guess some pretty heavy themes here, and then BAM! It hits you in the face and keeps on hitting you until you beg, and even then, it only stops because it runs out of time to hit you. It gives you so much time to invest in the cast and then proceeds to do some very shocking and intriguing things with them that just caught me so off guard after a certain point in the story. 9S is my friend, and I don't care what anyone will say about that. The gameplay is classic platinum fare by way of RPG, having plentiful level ups and opportunities to use your slick moves to undo the machines on your way through the game, but I found it really interesting, more so than the combat, just how customizable the characters really did feel, not just for like your typical stuff like weapons which can be changed, but for these plug-in chips you can find through the game, essentially like your abilities and stats modifiers. It makes your character, from a gameplay standpoint, mega versatile in how you can make them feel to control and how proficient you want them to be at certain things, including stuff like dealing stronger hits both physically and ranged, better dodging, critical health bonuses, defense moves, up and down attacks causing more damage, the works. The fact that you can have not just multiple weapon sets on the go at a time, but multiples of these chip setups is absolutely wild, meaning that you can change your strengths, resistances, and attributes at a moment's notice depending on what you need at that time. I didn't delve too deep into this, I focused more on just being a brutish force with a good dodge, but reflecting on what exactly would be necessary between attempts on particular bits of the game and modifying my build in response was really, really neat. It's not something I've seen or felt since I played Kingdom Hearts Rechain of Memories for the first time, with how you customize your deck and moves between fights when you fail. The game does have a decent difficulty curve, and the lore side of stuff can feel a little bit bloated with it, despite, being made to be more standalone, still name dropping and including a decent amount of stuff from other titles within the series. In spite of this, however, I think what I would say is that Nier is something that as many people as possible need to experience. It's a game that, for me, took time to fall in love with, but when I fell eventually, I fell very hard. Hey, it's December! It's time for me to talk about how I've played no new stuff and only revisited more familiar, comforting territory. Wrong! I break my own tradition all the time. TMNT Shredder's Revenge is a game I bought in the January sales alongside Crisis Core. I'd been saving it all year for when a few more of my friends had it, but it's December now and too late for that, so I grabbed my mate Jacob to give this one a couple of evenings with online co-op. I love Ninja Turtles. I grew up with some of the 80s show and the 2003 incarnation, as well as the 2007 film, and I loved the 2012 show. Back in the day, we'd get Hyperstone Heist booted up with a lovely parsec, and we'd be off to the races. Staying up late doing co-op of that game and others on weekends when I was 14 was pure bliss, and I'd heard superb things about Shredder's Revenge before playing it. They're all completely accurate. This game is a treat. I only played through it with 2 people, but the idea of getting 6 mates together to experience peak TMNT beat 'em up is just scintillating. Like, genuinely, when I was playing it, I was just like, what if there were 6 of us? This would be unbelievable. The game is gorgeous. Every sprite is so well animated and full of character, and this is brought together with the light bits of voice work that are featured within little cutscenes. The environments are varied, and the detail and little touches that go into every level just showcase how much love was quite clearly poured into this project. The gameplay adds a few new bells and whistles from the likes of the classics, but takes time to properly explain them to the player upon first boot up, to ensure that you never have a "huh? How did I do that?" moment ever while you're playing it. And the game further complements this by giving you optional objectives for each level, like not taking damage from level specific hazards, throwing enemies into pits, and killing 4 at once with a super. And because the levels are so fast paced, all around 5 to 5.5 minutes a pop, it never feels egregious to jump back in for another attempt if you muck up. This was a perfect, light-hearted palate cleanser after the heaviness of Nier Automata, and one that I would encourage anyone who even has a remote interest in the older TMNT titles or the franchise in general to check out. It's a love letter to the series in every way imaginable. Like, I was seeing dudes in places that I never thought I'd see again or had never even seen before, prompting me to be like, right, who what is this? But generally speaking, it was the perfect way to cap off my new gaming experiences. Something familiar, but something entirely new. Right, okay, we're done. It's mid-December now and I have no intention of playing anything new beyond this point, so let's chat about what I have been doing over the course of the festive period. Me and my mates went back to Fortnite and Dead by Daylight, things that I hadn't touched in quite a little while. The overhaul in terms of game modes for the former is absolutely maddening. The fact that there's just a full-ass Guitar Hero along with like loads of other game modes I haven't even touched is completely insane. It is truly its own behemoth within the gaming space now, and the dredge in the latter is just my favourite now. Farewell, Wraith, I've got a new horrible creature to play with. He's so neat. Like, have you seen the state of him? He's just a giant mass of bones and flesh and darkness. In terms of single player bits, I've had the odd foray back into Terraria, rekindling a love from over 10 years ago. Like legit, when I turned it on again for the first time in pretty much over a decade and heard the startup music again when I created my new world, I think it healed some hurt in some part of my soul. It is beautiful, that game. It's only gotten bigger since I stopped playing, and it's just a magnificent experience that I have loved dipping back into here and there. If we're on about healing the soul though, we have to talk about Kingdom Hearts. Me and my partner started a brand new file at their place on Vanilla KH1, and while I would say that FM is the superior way to experience my favourite game of all time, there's still nothing like Vanilla Kingdom Hearts 1 out there. It's so strange with its weird little intricacies, like not being able to skip cutscenes which were fixed later on, and having to navigate back to the bottom of the command menu after being so used to it being back on triangle, but it is so deeply engraved into my brain chemistry and my soul at this point. There's nothing like it in the world to me. It's genuinely just a magnificent and beautiful game. Lastly, the technically last new thing I played came at the final Newcastle Smash Weekly of this year. We all decided, because the PR was about to come out, it's time for a footy weekly, and we took it to the most logical extreme. Not just people playing different characters than normal, but Smash not being the only game that was on the table. And at that weekly, I got to try out a little bit of Rivals of Aether, and I didn't want to count it as a fully fledged entry on this list. I only played 25 minutes of it, but if it's not on next year's list, or the sequel, if it comes out, I don't know when that's coming out, I would be incredibly surprised. That game is incredibly fun. Talus, is that his name? The big polar bear fella is who I played, and he was very fun. And I would not be surprised if it is one of the earlier entries on next year's list. It's very, very fun. This year's been such a massively varied one for the games I've played, maybe the most varied ever. I did play a lot of platformers at the start, but I have diversified more and more as I've gone out, and the games I've played have all been big hits for me. But, as you know, only 10 of them can make this list, so let's find out which one stuck out to me the most. Number 10, Sonic Superstars. Superstars does make it into this top 10, but genuinely just by the skin of its teeth. It was a decently fun time that looks quite nice and gives quite a bit of freshness to the staling classic Sonic vibe, but certainly has plenty of room for improvement. Despite some obnoxious final bosses and questionable sounding music though, I can say I did enjoy my time with it, and would like to see it built upon in the future. Not as superb as it could have been, but hey, I did still have fun. Number 9. Ghostbusters Remastered. Revisiting the full version of a game I'd only previously experienced a little bit of, but had heard nothing but good things about, was a really nice and seasonally appropriate way to spend the dying days of autumn. Staying incredibly true to the source material for both gameplay and story, this feels like a worthy successor to the original film, and makes for a superb Halloween treat for fans of the series. Number 8. Pokemon Violet. Despite featuring in these lists more or less every single year, it's the first time a traditional Pokemon game has gone the distance, all the way from the start of the video to the top 10 of the entire year. Though, I think the genius of this one lies in how it tries to diversify and move forward from the established Pokemon formula, adding in a degree of freedom and exploration that's been sorely missing and needed within the series for quite some time. If it hadn't been for its poor technical performance, I think the wider view on this one would have been far more positive. For me though, it's a very encouraging sign for the future of the series. Number 7. Cereza and the Lost Demon. Telling a part of Bayonetta's history from this part of her life certainly would have been strange, utilising her traditional style of gameplay, but the pivot to something completely new to the series pays huge dividends, allowing the creation of an atmosphere and style of story that's incredibly charming to be guided through. What it moves away from in terms of intense, precise and satisfying action, it gains in engaging exploration and puzzle solving, a shift which completely pays off in spades. Number 6. TMNT Shredder's Revenge. The final new game I experienced prior to Christmas embodied perfectly the coziness I associate with the Christmas season. Feeling suitably homely because of how familiar I am with older games in the series, which are very similar, I'm so glad I decided to end with this one. It celebrates the series magnificently, using the past to inform the present but not relying on it hugely. A worthy follow-up to the likes of Turtles in Time and Hyperstone Heist that I think may have become my new favourite beat up. Number 5. New Super Lucky's Tale. As I'd said, I'd waited for quite a while to give this one a go, and I'm very glad I finally took the time to jump into the whimsical world the game creates. In a similar way to which I enjoyed DKCR way back in the day, the blend of traditional 3D and 2D platforming levels, alongside some fun locales and enjoyable puzzles and runner levels, really helps to keep this one feeling fresh throughout. I hope there's more in the pipeline for this series, because Lucky has the potential to become a modern classic if a hypothetical second game is just as good as this one. Before we get into the top 4, please let me preface it with this. I have had trouble in the past deliberating the order of the finales of these videos, but when I tell you that this was the most trouble I've ever had, maybe ever, writing any video, I hope it speaks to how difficult it was to order this top 4. These next 4 entries were pure torture, having to put one above the other, and I hope that stands to a testament to how much I enjoyed all of them. Number 4, Klonoa 1 and 2. It feels like every year I find some perfect duology of games that build on each other incredibly well. In both 2020 and 2021, these were hyper-violent games built on pure brutal catharsis with the Doom duology and the God of War duology. And this year, it's a couple of platformers straight from the generation of games I love the most. Unlike those two series though, I think I'm pretty happy with Klonoa stopping where it did, since I'm unsure as to how they'd have spiced it up even further if a third installment had ever come about. Despite this though, and in spite of them outwardly seeming to be incredibly simplistic, they completely wowed me with intensely satisfying mechanics, puzzles and platforming that are all utilised to their fullest and do not overstay their welcome. I don't think I've ever played another game quite like Klonoa, and I don't think a game will ever give me the same weird mix of emotions that both of these did ever again. And honestly, I'm perfectly fine with that. This entry on the list has been written since I finished Klonoa 2 way back at the start of the year. I knew it was always gonna rank high. Number 3, God of War and God of War Ragnarok. Following in the footsteps of the origins of this series last year, the modern God of War duology takes a place within the top 4. The shift away from what I loved last year did initially really concern me about how much enjoyment I'd find in these two, but both offer a different breed of enjoyment and show that the series is as excellent as I found it last year, albeit for different reasons. These two told a grand and emotional story with one of game's most iconic and violent protagonists, and the fact that both managed to stick the landing while not disowning what was there before is really, really special. I have not written the top 2 entries because, quite bluntly, within the top 4, which was difficult to order, this top 2 was agonizing. Like, this script for the video, everything else was finished weeks ago, and it is now the 22nd of December. I am sat, and only now, when I have sat down to record the audio for the rest of this video, have I finally made a decision. This was genuinely the most difficult thing I had to choose, and it literally came down to one factor, which I'll explain in a moment. Without any further ado, number 2, Nier Automata. It came down to the skin of these two games' teeth, but Nier Automata is the game which takes the number 2 spot. Its gameplay was brilliant and its story was spectacular, taking me through a ginormous roller coaster of emotions and feelings, both towards the game itself and towards the characters, and the fact that it came out at the number 2 spot I think should speak to how amazing the game is. What it came down to though is the fact that when all was said and done, I didn't feel the vibe to go back and 100% it, which was certainly not the case for number 1, Psychonauts 2. This is one of, if not the most deliberately designed, carefully crafted games I have ever seen, let alone had the pleasure of playing. An amazing platforming moveset with brilliantly designed and engaging and varied levels, with characters who are written so well and guide the story not just through some bouts of lovely humour, but some surprising emotion by the end. Backed up by combat which utilises your platforming moveset in entirely new ways, makes every move feel relevant, and music which is incredibly fitting and superbly catchy. The thing that put it over the top for me was the fact that I felt the need to go back and 100% it. Every collectible which is perfectly placed, every trophy. Psychonauts 2 was a miracle that it actually happened, and it is my favourite game that I played in 2023. So there you go, another year done. After all of that, it was a platformer that comes out on top. And looking back at the winners of my previous games of the year, we've got horror stuff from Resident Evil, we've got an RPG in the likes of Persona 5, and a platformer in the way of Sonic Frontiers. And this year, it's another platformer, and it very easily could have been Nier. Let me not leave that uncertain. This decision was not taken lightly, but yeah, really, really amazing. The top 4, as I said, was just agonizing to plan out. 2023 is almost finished up, and it was a year, as I said at the start, that was really, really full of change, but having settled into how things are now, and, you know, getting myself around a new schedule, I think that 2024 is going to be a really nice year. I hope, anyway. Even numbers are really good, aren't they? I'll see you all next year. Take care, and have a lovely new year.